نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So as we continue discussing the book Bulugh Al-Maram by Hafiz Ibn Hajar Al-Asqalani rahimahullah ta'ala, by Ibn Hajar Al-Asqalani عليه rahmatullahi ta'ala, and we're still discussing Kitab Tahara and discussing Bab Tayammum, so the ahkam that relates to Tayammum. So today inshallah ta'ala we'll try to cover two more hadith in this chapter. So the hadith, we also cover the hadith of Ali ibn Abi Talib, and the second hadith, the hadith of Jabir ibn Abdullah, as both relate to a specific topic that will be our discussion in this session. Tafaddal.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد. In chapter Tayammum, hadith number 115, narrated Ali radiallahu anhu, one of the bones, ulna, in my forearm was broken. So I asked Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he ordered me to wipe over the bandages. Reported by Ibn Majah with a chain of narrators that is very weak. Hadith 116, narrated Jabir radiallahu anhu, concerning the man who has sustained a wound in his head and took a bath and died. Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, it would have been sufficient for him to perform tayammum, then bind a bandage over the wound and wipe over it, and then wash the rest of his body. Reported by Abu Dawood with a chain containing weakness, and there is also disagreement concerning its narrator.
Bismillah. So this is the hadith that is mentioned. So these are the two hadith that Ibn Hajar alayhi rahmatullahi ta'ala have mentioned here regarding this within this chapter of Tayammum. So the hadith that was read, the first hadith being the hadith of Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, قال انكسرت إحدى زبدي فسألت رسول الله عليه السلام فأمرني أن أمسح على جبائر. Then he mentioned رواه Ibn Majah بسند واهن جدا. So that's the first hadith that has been mentioned here, the hadith of Ali ibn Abi Talib. The second hadith that he mentioned, the hadith of Jabir ibn Abdullah. So in our book, Kitab Jabir ibn Abdullah رضي عنه, ما في رجل الذي شج فاغتسل فمات فإنما كان يكفيه أن تيمم ويصعب أو على جرحه خرقة ثم يمسى عليها فيغسل سائر جسدي. رواه أبو داود بسند فيه ضعف وفيه اختلاف على رواتي. That's the second hadith. So these are the two hadith that Author Ali rahmatullah ta'ala mentioned in this chapter, and the chapter of Tayammum. So as for the first of those things to discuss is we said that takhrij of the hadith. So knowing concerning the source of the hadith, and also what have been mentioned by the ulama of hadith pertaining to the hukum of this hadith. So the first hadith, the hadith of Ali ibn Abi Talib, where the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned, where he said, Rawahu Ibn Majah بسند واهن جدا. So Ibn Hajar, I mentioned the hadith is collected by Ibn Majah, and also the isnad, it is wahin jiddan, hadith is very weak. So he mentioned that as for this hadith in the Ibn Majah, also Darussalam wal Bayhaqi. So this hadith, it is mentioned with Ibn Majah amongst Ashab al-Kutub al-Sitta. So Ibn Majah, I've mentioned this hadith amongst Kutub al-Sitta, amongst the 6 books of hadith. Then also Darussalam and Bayhaqi. And they mention min tariq Israel and Amr ibn Khalid and Zayd ibn Ali and Abihi and Jaddihi Ali ibn Abi Talib ta'ala anhu قال al-hadith. So as for the first hadith that I mentioned here, the hadith of Ali ibn Abi Talib, that would have a discussion around this hadith. So as we had mentioned, the isnad that have in the tariq, we have Israel narrates upon Amr ibn Khalid and Zayd ibn Ali and Abihi and Jaddihi Ali ibn Abi Talib. So in this hadith, or in this with this isnad, the ulama mentioned regarding that there's an individual in this isnad that I mentioned, Amr ibn Khalid al-Wasiti. So Amr ibn Khalid, that there's some discussion around this particular narrator. What had been said about him, كذبه أحمد وابن معين. Of the ulama, Ahmad ibn Hanbal wa Ali ibn Ma'in, that the oldest person to be So Ibn Ma'in and Ahmed, all these persons are kadhabu, that are all to be a person who lies. And that's a very serious criticism on a narrator or label on a narrator. Also Al-Hakim An-Naysaburi قال يروي عن علي موضوعات. That Hakim have stated that this particular narrator that he narrates on Ali hadith that is موضوع, fabricated hadith. وقال بخاري يعني Imam Bukhari قال about this narrator munkar hadith, that is his hadith are munkar. That's also a rejection of his hadith. Also Ibn Abi Hatim سألت أبي, that he mentioned I asked my father عن حديث رواه عمرو بن خالد عن زيد بن علي عن آبائه, يعني عن his grandfather أن علي انكسرت إحدى زبديه زنديه. That it mentioned فأمره النبي الإسلام أن يمسح على جبائر. Then it mentioned قال أبي, يعني قال هذا حديث باطل, هذا حديث باطل لا أصل له وأمر ابن خالد متروك الحديث. So the shahid from this, he mentioned that Ibn Abi Hatim asked his father Abu Hatim about this particular hadith and this particular narrator. So he mentioned regarding concerning the narrator that he questioned about was Amr ibn Khalid, and also he cited the hadith that is being mentioned, the hadith of Ali ibn Abi Talib. Then he mentioned that Abu Hatim, he mentioned هذا hadith باطل, the hadith it is باطل, invalid, or لا أصله, it has no basis. وأمر بن خالد متروك الحديث, and this person to be متروك الحديث. So also a severe caution against this person as hadith that they are rejected. Hadith they are rejected. Also you find that Al-Bayhaqi قال عمر بن خالد الواسطي, عمر ibn Khalid al-Wasiti معروف بوضع الحديث, that is famous for fabricating hadith. كذبه أحمد ibn Hanbal ويحيى ibn Ma'in وغيرهما and others. So Yahya ibn Ma'in also all this person, and Ahmed all this person, that he lies, he fabricate hadith. Yes, and وغيرهما من أئمة الحديث, and also other amongst the أئمة الحديث that they have spoken ill, very severe against this narrator. So that's concerning of what have been mentioned regarding this particular narrator. To the extent you find that An-Nawawi have mentioned regarding this person, hadithun daif. رواه this hadith, hadithun daif. رواه ابن ماجه والبيهقي وغيرهما اتفقوا على وضعه, that they mentioned that all على ضعفه, that ulama of hadith have agreed that the hadith is daif لأنه من رواية عمر بن خالد الواسطي واتفق الحفاظ على ضعفه. And the ulama of hadith that this person Amr ibn Khalid al-Wasiti, the ulama of hadith that they agree upon him being one who's weak. And I've mentioned that so that hadith is very weak, as we have stated that hadith is very weak. As for the second hadith that had been mentioned, that the hadith that the second hadith here that is mentioned, the hadith of Jabir bin Abdullah radhiyallahu anhuma أخرجه أبو داود والدارقطني والبيهقي. So the second hadith of Jabir ibn Abdullah, that hadith is found in the Abu Dawud in his Sunan, Daraqutni wal-Bayhaqi in their Sunan. Then it mentioned that in this hadith, they mentioned that in the Isnad that we have Musa ibn Abdul Rahman قال حدثنا محمد ibn Salama and Zubair ibn Khurayq and Ata and Jabir قال خرجنا في سفر. So the hadith is that they mention of Jabir is a hadith that is Ibn Hajar mentioned a portion of hadith. This hadith is much more lengthier and longer. So the hadith in full length, it mentioned, it states concerning خرجنا في سفر, that Jabir Abdullah, he mentioned that خرجنا في سفر, that we were in a journey. فأصاب رجل منا حجر وشجه في رأسه, that a person that had an injury, a person was struck and he had an injury to his head. فقال ثم احتلم, then also the person that he had a wet dream that night. فأصاب فسأل أصحابه, then he asked his companion. فقال هل تجدوا لي رخصة في تيمم. He asked his companion, is it allowed, do you see that I have a reason to have to make tayammum due to my circumstance? فقالوا لا نجد لك رخصة. So the companion, they respond that we do not find for you any form of rukhsa, any form of for you to make tayammum. فقال فأنت, they mention وأنت تقدر على الماء, because you are able to use water. فاغتسل فمات. So the person, he took a bath and he died. فلما قدمنا على نبي الإسلام, when we came to the Prophet عليه السلام, أخبر بذلك, he was informed regarding what have occurred. فقال, then the Prophet عليه السلام, he responds by saying, فقال قتلوه ألا سألوا إذا لم يعلموا, that you should ask if you do not know, that you have killed him, and you should ask if you do not know. فإنما شفاء العي, that the cure for العي, which is الجهل, السؤال. So العي is ignorance. If you do not know, its cure is for you to ask. فقال إنما كان يكفيه, then this is a shahid mention, إنما كان يكفيه, it is sufficient for him أن يتتيم ويصعر أو يصعب شك الموسى, شك راوي موسى, على جوره خرقة ثم يمسى عليها فيغسل ساهر جسدي. Then he mentioned the hadith that it was sufficient for the person for him to make tayammum over the area of the wound that he had bandage, then for him to wipe over it, and for him to perform ghusl for the rest of his body. Al-Hadith. So this hadith, they mentioned that this hadith, that in the isnad, the narrator, Zubair ibn Khurayq. In the isnad, Zubair ibn Khurayq. When they mention huwa da'if, that is somewhat discussed among the ulama of hadith. They mention also, فَإِنْ فَرَدَ بِلَفْ ثُمَّ يَمْسَ عَلَيْهَا. And also, he's the only one who have mentioned that you should wipe over this area, that the person had the injuries. So they mentioned that this person is the only one that mentioned that, and they mentioned لَمْ يَرْوِ عَنْهُ لَا يَرْوِي إِلَّا مِنْ طَرِيقٍ. No one has said this except for him, but also he's daif. I've mentioned. They mentioned regarding concerning that, and also that is the ikhtilaf between him and Awzahi, where Awzahi rahimahullah ta'ala mentioned an Ata and Ibn Abbas. So the narration, so the khilaf between him and Awzahi, where Awzahi, when he narrates this hadith, he narrates an Ata, yani Ibn Abi Rabah, and Ibn Abbas. So the hadith of Al-Zubair ibn Khurayq, he narrates an Jabir. Awzahi with his isnad, it goes back to Ibn Abbas. It goes back to Ibn Abbas. So the khilaf regarding the hadith is of the Muslim of Ibn Abbas, or this hadith the Muslim of Jabir ibn Abdullah. So they mentioned that and others, that you find that others, Ibn Majah, also narration Ahmed or Ibn Khuzaymah, that they narrate this hadith on Ibn Abbas, not on Jabir. So the narration in the Ahmed, also a narration in the Ibn Majah, and also Ibn Khuzaymah, that this hadith is narrated from the Musnad, from the hadith collection, from the hadith of Ibn Abbas, not from the hadith of Jabir. So you have that khilaf. Then I mentioned that Al-Mahfuz min hadith Ata and Ibn Abbas, walaysa min hadith Ibn Abbas, and also in the hadith of, so what's the more correct version? The hadith they mentioned is from Ibn Abbas, Ata and Ibn Abbas, and also laysa fi hadith Ibn Abbas, and also the narration in Ibn Abbas, it mentioned laysa fihi, not in it, al-mas'ala jabira. There's no mention of him wiping over the bandage, or the ear that is of this bandage. So they mentioned that that's also been mentioned regarding this particular hadith. We find that Darussalam he mentioned لم يره أن أتى أن جابر غير زبير ibn خريخ وليس بقوي. And this narrator is the only one who narrated the hadith upon Jabir, going back to Jabir, and also is not qawi, as mentioned. So they mentioned وخالفه أوزاهي, that Awzahi oppose him. فرواه عن أتا, by Awzahi narrated the hadith upon Ata ibn Abi Rabah, and Ibn Abbas, واختلف على أوزاهي فقيل. And also you have a difference regarding the narration of Awzahi, where it mentioned at times an Ata, وقيل قال بلغني an Ata, where sometimes use the word an Ata, at times use the word بلغني an Ata. وأرسل أوزاهي آخره, and also Awzahi also have narrated also the hadith that Darussalam we mentioned an Ata and Nabi Islam. We mentioned that an Ata without mentioning of Ibn Abbas, where Ata narrates directly upon the Prophet Islam, that is called Mursal. وهو صواب, and said that is the more correct. So a khilaf regarding this hadith. in narration of Awzahi. So that discussion regarding this particular hadith. So this hadith, on the discussion between the ulama about those two hadith, are said to be hadith that are said to be daif with the ulama. So the next of those discussions, so the hadith they mentioned, so the hadith regarding wiping upon the Prophet Islam, they mentioned that Al-Busiri, so the ulama were all concerned that even the narration mentioned هذا إسناد منقطع قال دارقطني عن أوزاعي عن عطاء مرسلة. So a discussion also that the hadith is also narrated mursala, and some narration that we show us concerning that there's some discussion, severe discussion regarding this particular hadith, where the ulama all the hadith to be da'if. They mentioned regarding the part about the hadith mentioned the first part of the hadith regarding قتلوه قتلهم الله, that you have killed them, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala kill them. ألا سهلوا إذا لم يعلموا, that you are to ask if you do not know. فإنما شفاء العيا السوال. Up to that part they mentioned that part of the hadith is sahih. Of the ulama mentioned that some of the ulama all up to that part of the hadith is sahih. After what comes is where you have a discussion between the ulama regarding this particular hadith, which is that mention about wiping over the band-aid. So on this matter, the ulama mentioned regarding concerning that this particular hadith, the meaning of the hadith. So the next part is regarding what's meant or the meaning of the hadith. So this hadith or these two hadith that they mentioned that regarding concerning the person who had an injury, and the person then have somewhat put something over that area of things of band-aid or of other things that then the person that they wiped over that area and they washed the remaining part of their body. So that's concerning this hadith. Showed concern that the permissibility or is what's the ruling regarding the hadith. It shows that is something which is permissible. Show the permissibility of this. That they have mentioned regarding concern that the permissibility. So also the hadith, it shows that the mawdu of the hadith, that hadith concerning discussed regarding al-mas'ala jaba'ir. This hadith is to show that discuss the issue regarding that a person who may have some form of injury and that he have been covered with either some form of cast on that area or some form of bandage have been put on that area because of that injury, where the person have a broken hand or some form of injury, but that ear have been covered by some form of bandage, it's allowed for the person to what is to be done in that case. If that those ears, a person need to normally would wash, but now that area is now covered with some form of bandage, what to be done. They mentioned regarding concern, so that's the discussion of this particular hadith. So of the masail that are covered, I mentioned, was the hukum regarding al-mas'ala jaba'ir wal asaib. So asaib, that they have clarified regarding concerning that they mention jabira takuna ala qasr. Jabira is normally used when the person have a broken hand or a broken part of the body. So jabira is used to kind of somewhat to assist the person, or use when a person have a broken limb. That's jabira. And also isaba. So isaba is when the person that they have some form of a bandage. Bandage is placed on the person who have some type of wound or cut on their body. So that's the difference between both. Jabira for things that have been broken limb, and isaba for when the person has some form of injury and it is covered with some form of cloth or bandage. So with this matter, that of the aqwal of the ulama, are what is discussed regarding the ahkam of this hadith. The first of those matters that are covered regarding this hadith, al-mas'ala jabira wa asaib. That a person who have a broken limb, some form of plaster cast have been placed on his hand, or some form of bandage have been placed on the person's wound, then what to be done in that case? The ulama, they have three aqwal as to what to be done in that case. So the person need to perform wudu or ghusl but part of that body is that to be washed, it is covered with some form of covering due to an injury. So I mentioned that of the ulama mentioned the first view of the ulama أنه يستعمل الماء لجميع أعضائه قادر على استعمال الماء, that a person who is able to use water, then they use water on all parts of the body that is able. So all parts of the body that a person is able to use water, he should do so. ويمسح على جبيرة. As for the area that is now covered with the cast or the bandage, then that area they mention mas. The person, he wipes over that area. He would wipe over that area. And that is, so the person will wash what he's able to wash with water of the body, and the area that is covered by the cast, because the broken or the bandage, then the person would wipe over that area. He'll wipe over that area. And that's called Jumhur al-Ulama. That's the call taken by Jumhur of the Ulama. And they use, for example, the hadith that we have mentioned here to show the permissibility of this. They use the hadith to show the permissibility of this. So the evidence that they use this hadith, where they mentioned, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned this hadith of Jabir, and also the hadith of Ali, is that their evidence. Also added, they use concern that, that the fail of the Salaf, amongst them Ibn Omar. So they mentioned it in the Abdul Razak wal-Bayhaqi, يعني يروي عن ابن عمر أنه قال أنه توضأ وكفه معصوبة. And so they mentioned that he performed wudu, and his kaf, his hand, was somewhat covered with bandage. When they mentioned فمسح على أصائب وغسل سوى ذلك, that he wiped over that area on his hand, and he washed the remaining parts of the body, and he was performing al-wudu. So in performing wudu, the area that was covered, he wiped over that area because of the injury, and the remaining part of the body was of the limbs were washed under the field of Ibn Umar. They mentioned isnaduhu sahih, that isnad is sahih, going back to Ibn Umar. I mentioned la mukhalafa min as-sahaba, that is not known regarding any other sahaba go in contrary to what the practice of Ibn Umar. Also they use al-qiyas. So of the evidence that they use regarding the permissibility of wiping over this area that has been covered and wash the remaining area, they mention also al-qiyas ala khuffayn. They mention al-qiyas ala khuffayn, where they mention that al-qiyas khuffayn is that area is covered, but it's been allowed for the person to wipe over it due to performing a tahara. So they mentioned that the same thing can be done, and that is done for haja. So wiping over al-khuf, which is the socks, that is done as a haja, as just a case of the said. And I mentioned a case of, and that is not wajib, but in this case, the person that wiping over mas'al al-jubi, I mentioned that is something done ala darura. That's done by way of the person, a case of need. You have no other option. So they mentioned that based upon this, something which is allowed as al-khuf, they mention is less of a issue, less of a difficulty compared to that of the jabira. So that is something which is the person unable to go around this. So they mention that if the person is allowed to do so, in that case of a general wish to do so, of wiping over the socks, then a case of necessity, the person allowed to wipe over the area which is covered by way of a cast or bandage. So that's concerning the qawl of Jumhur of the ulama. And of those who take this view, they mentioned, Ibn Muna mentioned, وَأَكْثَرْ أَهْلِ الْعِلْمِ يُجِيزُونَ الْمَسْأَلَ جَبَائِرِ, that majority of the ulama, all that is allowed for the person to wipe over the bandage or the cast. They mention that of those who take this view, Ibn Umar, Ibn Abbas is said to be of this view. Also, it is mentioned the view of Hassan al-Basri. Also, the madhab of Imam Malik, Ahmed, Ishaq ibn Rahuya, Abu Thur, Awza'i, Shafi, fi madhabihi al-Qadim. That Imam Shafi was his older view that he held. And I mentioned Fuqaha al-Madina al-Sab'a. And the Fuqaha of Medina of Sab'a, that they also took this view. So, majority of the ulama take this view. The second opinion state أنه يكفي بالغسل للأعضاء القادر عليه ويترك جبيرة ولا يمس عليها ولا تيمم عنها. That the second view is that the person yakfi, it's sufficient for the person to wash those areas that he's able to wash. As for the area that is covered with the cast or the likes, then the person does not wipe over it, nor perform tayammum. The person does not, the area that is covered with the cast, because of it's being broken, or there's a wound, injury that is there, the person has to cover it, then the person does not wipe, nor he perform tayammum. Only does wash what he's able, and that is sufficient. It only covered which is sufficient, and that is enough. And they mention at the view of this view, they mention that the evidence for this, that they mention that there's no hadith that is authentic regarding wiping upon these areas, wiping over these areas that have a cast and the likes. And also they mentioned that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ, that you should fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala according to what is within your capacity and ability. So they mention that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not burden a soul beyond what it is able to carry. So they mentioned that the person, there's no evidence that is authentic upon the Prophet ﷺ that he wiped over this area. So the person only wash what he's able, and the rest he leaves it. The third opinion, and of that view that they mentioned, that the view of the who take of this view, they mentioned Ibn Sirin, Al-Zahiriyah, and also of contemporaries, of the ulama of contemporary time, Sheikh Albani and Sheikh Mu'bid ibn Hadi Al-Wadi'i, alayhi rahmatullahi ta'ala. So the view, the second view, that the person only wash what he's able, and that's sufficient. That's the view of Ibn Sirin, Al-Zahiriyah, and also of contemporary Sheikh Albani and Sheikh Mu'bid ibn Hadi Al-Wadi, one of the ulama of Yemen. And the third opinion, that a person annahu tayammum, that a person he performs tayammum, that a person perform tayammum, so the person performs a tayammum, and he wipes over the area that is of the covering, either by way of the cast or anything else, that area that is covered. He performed tayammum, so he performed concerning also tayammum mas, so he wipe over the area that is of the cast, and tayammum for what remain. Tayammum for what remain. So that's considered aqwal of the ulama regarding that matter. So those are the aqwal of the ulama on that particular matter. That of those who are concerned, that more were inclined toward the first view. And then they mentioned that al-qawl awwal aqrab, and that being that it's been authenticated on Ibn Omar that he did this. So the personal concern, so you find that Ibn Omar, that he did wash the area that he could, and he wiped over the area that was covered with the cast or something similar, that he wiped that area, and without performing tayammum. So it shows that Ibn Omar did this, and also no Sahabi went against him. That they mentioned also that it's been authenticated Ibn Abbas, but there's some kalam regarding what have been mentioned Ibn Abbas. That Ibn Abbas also have that narration about Ibn Abbas, but also there's some kalam regarding it being authentic, going back to Ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma. So that's concerning that the qawl al-jumhur that they mentioned, that seems to be the more correct view, that the view that's taken by Ibn Umar among the Sahaba, and also jumhur of the ulama is of this opinion, and amongst them al-fuqaha as-sab'a min ahli Medina and others who have taken their viewpoint. And also this view is the view that has been taken by Ibn Taymiyyah, the first opinion that is more inclined at Ibn Taymiyyah, also yurajah qawl al-awwal, and also of contemporaries Ibn Uthaymin. So Allama Ibn Uthaymin, that also aligned to the first opinion. So those are the opinions that we have mentioned between the ulama on that matter. The second of the matter that are covered regarding this particular matter, that the ulama, they discuss regarding al-ishtirat tahara fi mas'ala jabira. The person wish now to wipe on the cast or whatever covering that they have from the injury. Is it the person in doing so, does the person have to be in a state of tahara before he's allowed to wipe over those areas? And they mentioned that is this the same as what the person would do in the state of al-masala khuffain? So the person who's going to wipe on his socks, then of the condition, the precondition is that the person should already be in a state of tahara. So is the same thing apply regarding the person who wish to wipe over these the cast or bandage that is on his injury? They mentioned that the ulama, they have a khilaf on this matter, but so they mentioned that akthar ulama that take the position that is not a requirement. So the akthar, majority of the ulama, is of the opinion it is not required for a person who wish to wipe, that he has to be in a state of tahara before. That's not the condition. So at any point it occurs, the person is allowed to do so. As I mentioned, that's min bab al-darura, as something which is a case of necessity. So it is not a condition that a person must be in a state of tahara before for him to wipe over these cast or things of that nature for his tahara. So that's concerning qawl of the majority of the ulama. And they mentioned that that's the matter of the Hanafi, the Maliki, Riwaya, and Ahmed, that they do not put as a condition, and a Jama' min al-Hanabila, and also the Hanabila, that they mentioned so, that there's no text regarding that this being a criteria to already be in a state of tahara before. There's no text by Quran or Sunnah. Also, there's no ijma on this matter. So they see it as there is or qawl sahabi on this matter. So they see it as there's no need. That is not a criteria. And also that does put more difficulty on the person in that situation. That would just put more mashaqqa, difficulty on the person. So they mentioned it is not a condition, and also one cannot make qiyas with the khuf on this matter. So also there's no qiyas between the khuf on this and the person on this matter. So they mentioned that is not a criteria for this. The third, another of the masal they discuss, that a person in doing this does, they discuss the matter regarding, does the person need to ensure that the area that is being wiped on the cast, that the person cover all of the area, not just wipe a portion of it, but that the person needs to cover in wiping on the cast or the area that has the bandage, does the person need to wipe over everything, cover the entire area, or a portion is sufficient? On this matter, that it is stated by Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, he mentioned al-jabira yastaw'ibuha, that a person needs to cover the entire area. Bilmas kama yastaw'ib al-jild, that a person needs to cover the entire, wipe over the entire area with the hand. So the entire area need to be covered over, not just a part of it. And that's also echoed by Ibn Taymiyyah, that he mentioned regarding concern that وكذلك المس يجب أن يؤم جميع الجبيرة وأما المس على خفين فهو رخصة. So they mentioned a person regarding wiping over the area that has been covered, the cast or the likes, then that entire thing needs to be wiped. The entire area need to be wiped over, and that is as the matter regarding the khuf, that's a rukhsa, and we have text for it. As for this matter, is that is a badal, so the person need to comply with all the area. It is wiped with the wet hand. Of the matter, so that's concerning qawl of jumhur of the ulama on this matter. Of the thing that they mentioned regarding concerning that al-mas'ala jabira, is a time limit set to it. So the person who have that injury, that broken limb, is there time set regarding that the person can only wipe over it, we say with a wet hand, the damp hand. So the hand has to be damped when they wipe over that area. So they'd have a bandage or or a cast on it. That is their time limit set for it. The ulama mentioned regarding concern that there is there's no time limit set for this. There's no time limit that is set for this. So there's no time limit that is set for this. And the person will wipe over those areas whether for taharatul kubra or sugra, whether al-ghusl or wudu. You can wipe and there's no time that is set as long as the person have this covering on that area of his body, then he wipes until it is removed completely. He wipe until it is removed. So there's no tawqeet, no time set for this. And that's the call taken by Jumhur of the ulama on this matter. The next of the matter they discuss regarding a person who have an injury and there's no cast or no covering on that area. So nothing to cover it by way of cloth, bandage, or any form of cast place on the area. Then what to be done? Hal yamsa, is the person still to wipe over it? So there's nothing over it. Or the person perform tayammum. So the person have a wound on his hand, a burn on his hand, a large burn, or the person have a broken hand, but it's not covered with anything. What to be done in that case? That they mentioned regarding concern to know that in this particular ulama have a difference between the ulama. That if there's no covering on it, they mentioned that the first of the ulama mentioned that an yamsa alayhi aw tayammum lahu, either that the person perform, does he wipe or perform tayammum over that area. Ash-Shafi, Madhab al-Shafi'iyya, and a Jama'a min al-Hanabila, and some of the Hanabila, that they mentioned the person he make tayammum. That a person he makes tayammum. So the person does not have any covering on it, then the person perform tayammum and does not wipe. And does not wipe because there's no bandage or any covering for him to wipe, so he perform tayammum. So that's concerned the qawl taken by some of the ulama, amongst them the Shafi'iyya and also some of the Hanabila. And the person continue to wipe, or the person continue to make tayammum until either because there's no covering over it, so he's allowed to perform, he performed tayammum in this particular case. It is mentioned that regarding concern Athar and Ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma fi rajul, began a man alladhi bihi juruh, a person who had like injuries that I mentioned la yastati al-ghusl, and is unable to perform ghusl. فقال Ibn Abbas tayammum, he told the person perform tayammum. So they mentioned that so that be the same thing, a person who is ill ويخشى على نفسه إذا استخدم الماء tayammum, that a person who have an injury, who is ill and he fears using of water, then he perform tayammum. So that person, he falls into that case. The second view of the ulama, the view of the Hanafiya and the Malikiyya and Sahih in the Hanabila, they mention yamsa al-ma' ala al-jurh aw kas, that a person that he wipe over that area with water. So water, he will wipe over the area because there's no bandage or anything on it, no covering. So they mention the person that he would wipe over that area with water as long as there's no covering over that area. And he does not perform tayammum. La yatatayyam. He does not perform tayammum. There's no tayammum for him. So that's concerned the view that is taken by some of the ulama regarding that particular matter, that they mentioned, the Prophet I mentioned, ما أمرتكم به فافعلوا منه ما استطعتم الحديث. The Prophet I mentioned, ما أمرتكم به, what I've commanded you to, فافعلوا منه ما استطعتم, that you should do, if I've commanded you to do something, then you should do of it what you're able. So they mentioned that the person unable, if you're unable to wash, then he wipes. So the person unable to wash that area, then he would wipe over that area. So that is within his ability. So that's concerning the qawl of some of the ulama. They mention qawl that it is yastahab, that the person does this. That's the second view of the ulama on this matter. But overall I mentioned إذا كان, that a person that believes that if he was to wipe over that area it will cause more damage to himself, or then the person perform tayammum. So the person believes he's unable to wipe over, is unable to wash, nor is able to wipe over that area with his hand or something, then, or the person damp a piece of cotton and wipe over that area. If he's unable to do that, then the person will perform tayammum. He perform tayammum. They discuss regarding that a person مريض إذا أمكن المريض غسل بعض جسدي. If the person who is ill but is able to wash a portion of his body. The person is ill but is able to wash a portion of his body. What to be done in that case? He's unable to do the entire thing, but he's able to do a portion. So what to be done in that case? Regarding that, they mentioned the person, put him in two category. That state we will put in the two category. The first category, that a person concerned إذا كان أغلب بدن أو أغلب أعضاء الوضوء يمكن غسلها. If the person is able to, if most of his body is able to wash it, what about way of ghusl or wudu? So majority is still able to be washed, whether in performing wudu or ghusl. But majority, they mention that the madhab al-arba yajib ghusluha. Is must for him to wash what he's able, and he's able to do majority, so that the majority has to be washed. So they mentioned regarding concern that so they mentioned that the person in that case that he wash the majority that is able to wash off his body. That's the call of A'immat al-Arba. Then they mentioned that, and they mentioned the hadith that we have mentioned before regarding that, as the Prophet mentioned, said that hadith is da'if though. إنما كان يكفيه أن تيمم ويعصب على جرعه خرقة ثم يمس عليها ويغسل. They mentioned ويغسل ساهر جسدي. So the Prophet mentioned that wipe what you can, and the remaining of the body you wash it. So they mentioned that the remaining of the body that is able to wash must be washed. The second, they mention situation a person may be in, that إذا كان أغلب بدن, that لا يمكن غسله. The person that majority of his body is unable to, he has a severe burn, been burnt, and majority of his body is burnt. They mention that case that فيه خلاف بين العلماء. In that case where the person is unable to wash majority of his body. In that case, the severe burn or the likes, or the person have fever of his body, they mention what to be done in that case. They mention as-sahih min aqwal al-ilm annahu yajib, that they mention that he wash what is able of the part that is able. So he wash that which is able, even if it is the a small portion of the body. They mention that that also to be washed. And tayammum or al-mas is to be done for the remaining, which would be the majority. So wipe if the majority, the person's body is in some form of cast, or entire body is covered in some form of covering, bandage, then a person will wipe over those areas, and what is able to, one of his arm is without, then he would wash that arm and wipe the remaining, and wipe over the remaining. So they mentioned regarding concern that because these things are for bab of darura, so the person only make use of what he needs. So even if the majority of the body needs to be wiped, it is done, but that portion that still can be washed, it is to be washed. Even maybe the least of the body, or the minority of his body, of the body parts. So that is, so you have a khilaf between the ulama on this matter, but that of the aqwal of the ulama on this matter So that's concerning that, and that's the call of the Hanabila and Shafi'iyah. That's the call of the Hanabila and the Shafi'iyah. It is yajib for a person to wash what he is able and wipe what he is able. So that's concerning what is mentioned regarding of these masahil, or some of the masahil that is covered. We just end this mention. If the person al-khul al-jabira ba'da al-wudu wa mas alayha, the person he had and was covered in bandage, but then he removed the bandage, but before it was removed he was in a state of tahara. He was already performed wudu and a state of tahara. So when that is removed, whether from, let's say, his hand, but he's already in a state of tahara, then what does the person do regarding, in that case, does that nullify what the person to be done in that case? It mentioned by Ibn Taymiyyah, هذا فيه نزاع, that regarding what to be done, does the person lose his wudu or need to renew his wudu because now the bandage or the cast has been removed, but the person before it was removed was in a state of tahara. What to be done in that case? Mentioned adhar annahu la yanqudh al wudu, that it does not nullify the person wudu. So the person who was at the cast on a portion of his hand, it was before it was removed, he was in a state of tahara. While it was removed, he was still in a state of tahara. Now after then, does the person need to renew his wudu, or does it nullify his wudu? Ibn Taymiyyah, all that, it does not. It does not nullify his wudu. It does not nullify his wudu. So that's concerning of those things to discuss regarding this matter. So inshallah ta'ala we'll end there and continue discussing other masail of this bab. Some additional stuff will be mentioned in the next session regarding things that relate to Tayammum. So that inshallah ta'ala will end here and end this session. وبالله تعالى توفيق وهذه السبيل والآخرة والحمد لله العالمين. I want